What was the most heartbreaking thing that happened to me in prison? I was arrested after making the incredibly stupid mistake of driving without a license. When the police asked for my license, I told them I didn't have one but provided the name and birth date of my sister instead. I was charged with violating probation, initially for identity theft, and had to wait in jail for my court date. Prior to this, I had never been in any legal trouble, but I made the foolish decision to try and deceive the police to avoid getting a ticket for driving without a license. After about 4 weeks in jail, I started experiencing intense headaches. The pain only grew worse, so I asked to see the medical staff in the prison. When I met with the assistant doctor, I described the pain starting from my sinuses, radiating up to the top of my head, and was diagnosed with sinusitis. I accepted this and began taking the antibiotics prescribed. A week passed, and the pain did not subside. It actually grew worse. I asked to see the doctor again. This time, I told her the pain had spread to one side of my face and the back of my neck, and I requested to be sent to the hospital. However, the doctor told me she could not send me to the hospital because hospital trips were reserved for emergency cases, and she concluded that I had a dental issue. Another day passed, and I could not take it anymore. The pain had become so severe that I couldn't move without feeling like my head was about to explode. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I was just lying in bed crying. I begged every officer and guard to please help me, but everyone refused. About 9 days after the headache started, I began seeing double. I told the nurse who gave me my medication that my vision was blurry. She told me to write a request to see the doctor. A few hours after the double vision started, I was talking with a fellow inmate when she exclaimed, "Oh my God, your eyes are misaligned." I looked in the mirror in my room and was horrified to see my eyes had become crossed. I called my mom, panicked, telling her that my eyes were misaligned and begging her to call the prison and convince them to send me to the hospital. Every time my mom called the prison, they reassured her that I was getting proper medical care. I asked to speak to the warden, and after about an hour, one finally came to see me. I pointed to my eyes, told him I was experiencing the worst pain of my life, and pleaded with him to send me to the hospital. I told him that something was terribly wrong, and if I wasn't treated soon, I would die. He just laughed and said, "Oh, I didn't know you were a doctor," and told me to go back to my cell, saying I could go to the clinic tomorrow. The next morning, after another sleepless night, I discovered that I couldn't walk normally. Instead of walking as usual, I had to take small, unsteady steps, as though I had lost my balance, and everything around me seemed to spin. I was on the second floor, and it was very difficult to get down the stairs. I was taken to the medical office again, but this time I was scolded for not stopping. They told me to stop bothering the officers and guards, and they blamed me, saying all of this was my fault for taking someone else's medication. I was completely stunned and told them I had never taken anyone else's medication. The assistant doctor said she was sure I had taken someone else's medication because that was the only explanation for why my eyes had become crossed, and she concluded it was a drug reaction. I cried and told her that this was a neurological issue, and I begged to be sent to the hospital. I told her I was certain I would die if I wasn't treated and pleaded for her to save me. Coldly, she called the officer and said, "Take her back to her cell. Stop bringing her here. She's wasting my time." I felt completely powerless. I was sure I was seriously ill, and the prison would let me die in my cell, alone and terrified. I was then moved downstairs to ensure my safety, and I remained there, waiting either to pass out or die. My fellow inmates began intervening, telling the prison staff they needed to help me, but everything was just ignored. About 2 hours later, I adjusted my head, and the pain became so severe that I began screaming uncontrollably. The officer was called, and when he came to my cell, I remember telling him, "Please, you have to help me. I'm a human being. I'm only 26. Please don't let me die." I burst into tears and knew that he had finally heard me. He replied, "All right, put on your shoes. We're going to get you checked out." I cried uncontrollably, thanking him. He had to help me walk down the hall. At the end of the hall, he stopped to open a side door and brought me inside. We entered a room with a desk, 2 holding cells, and a bathroom. He opened a cell door and made me sit on a wooden chair. He left, closing the door behind him. I asked him, "When will I go to the hospital?" He answered, "You're not going anywhere. We can't have you screaming like that, disturbing everyone in the unit. You'll stay in this cell until you grow up. Diagnosis and outcome. I felt completely desperate. I was locked in a cell that should have been used for people who were suicidal. A desk was placed right outside my cell door, and a guard was assigned to sit there and watch me. That entire night, I lay in the cell, crying non-stop. I remember singing to soothe the pain. I screamed a lot and begged the guard for help, but she just sat there and ignored me. I began vomiting uncontrollably, making the pain in my head and neck even worse. It was the worst night of my life. The next morning, a doctor and an officer came to see me. I told them I couldn't walk, I couldn't see, and I was experiencing the worst pain of my life. Again, I begged, for the 100th time, to be sent to the hospital. I reminded them that I was a human being, that I would die soon if I wasn't helped. The doctor looked at me for a moment, then said, "Take her back to her cell. It's all her fault." I began crying and screaming, feeling that the pain and suffering I was enduring didn't matter to them, that to them, I was just a criminal, less than even a dog. Another officer came in and spoke to me. I begged her, "Please, I'm dying. Please take me to the hospital." She stood still for a moment, then said the most important words of my life. "All right, we'll take you to get checked out." At the hospital, I was given an MRI and CT scan, but nothing was found. I then underwent a lumbar puncture. The doctor said my spinal fluid shot out like a fountain. The test results confirmed I had fungal meningitis. The doctor said that if the prison had waited 12 more hours, I would have definitely died. My mom had contacted the judge to request that I be released to stay with family during recovery, so I wouldn't be chained to a hospital bed with guards watching over me. After 10 spinal taps to relieve the pressure in my brain and spine, along with strong painkillers and antifungal medications, I recovered. I had double vision for a long time and had difficulty walking, but I eventually made a full recovery. However, I would never fully recover mentally from those 11 days of hell. I lost my trust in humanity. All the people who worked in that prison just stood by and watched me suffer. I was tortured. The medical staff, who were trained, ignored me even though it was obvious I was seriously ill. To them, I was just a criminal. I had broken the law, so I deserved whatever I got. A few months later, I decided to sue the prison. Every prisoner has the right to receive adequate medical care. My human rights were violated, and I wanted them to pay. But I learned that in New York, you have to file a lawsuit within 90 days of the incident, something I didn't know. I couldn't sue anymore. I am still haunted by claustrophobia, PTSD, and nightmares. I suffer from mental trauma, and I don't know if I will ever fully recover.